After I heard what I heard, I didn't confront her. I didn't send angry messages. I didn't ask questions I already suspected I knew the answers to. I did something quieter. I started paying attention to everything I had ignored before. At first, I told myself I was just being careful. But it wasn't caution. It was awareness. And awareness changes how you experience everything. Conversations felt different. Not worse. Just reduced. Less detail. Less curiosity. Less emotional presence. It wasn't anything I could accuse her of. That was the problem. Everything still looked normal. But it didn't feel normal anymore. I stopped reacting emotionally in real time. Not intentionally at first. It just started happening. When she spoke, I didn't immediately interpret anymore. I just listened, like I was collecting data instead of participating in emotion. And that changes everything. Because relationships survive emotion, but they don't survive detachment. And then something happened that made me realize I wasn't imagining the shift. But I still didn't act on it. An old teammate from my competitive years reached out. Someone I hadn't spoken to in a long time. It started normally. Training talk, career updates, life catching up. Nothing meaningful at first. But conversations like that don't stay neutral when your emotional baseline is already unstable. They start filling gaps without permission. And I didn't notice it immediately because I wasn't looking for replacement. I was looking for clarity. At this point, I was living two experiences at once. My relationship on one side, my internal interpretation on the other, and they didn't match anymore. That mismatch is where detachment begins, not with conflict, with inconsistency. But what I didn't realize yet was that inconsistency was happening on both sides. She started traveling more often. Short explanations, vague timelines, reduced detail. Nothing I could directly challenge, but also nothing I could fully ignore. And I had to make a decision. Either question everything and risk being insecure, or observe long enough until the pattern spoke for itself. I chose observation. Calls continued, but they changed shape. Less engagement, more completion. Like tasks being checked off instead of conversations being shared. And that's when I realized something important. Nothing had to be wrong for things to fall apart. They just had to stop being maintained. And slowly, they stopped being maintained without anyone acknowledging it. I didn't announce anything. I didn't confront anything. I didn't even internally justify it anymore. I simply stopped investing emotionally in real time. Not out of anger, out of recognition. Because once you stop expecting emotional return, you stop giving emotional urgency. And urgency is what keeps relationships alive. The more I detached, the more obvious things became. Not new things, just previously ignored things. That's the dangerous part. Nothing changes. You just finally see it clearly. And that clarity eventually led me to a realization I couldn't ignore anymore. But I still didn't act on it. It wasn't a breakup yet. It wasn't even a confrontation. It was something in between. A relationship continuing in form, but dissolving in function. And that's the hardest stage to recognize, because everything still exists, but nothing is alive in it anymore. I stopped imagining repair, not because I was hurt, but because I stopped seeing a version of events where repair was necessary. And once that happens, the ending is already written, even if nobody has said it yet. And I didn't realize it at the time. But I wasn't waiting for truth anymore. I was waiting for the moment I would finally stop pretending I needed it. By the time I fully accepted what was happening, I didn't feel anger anymore. I didn't feel confusion either. Just distance. And distance changes the entire structure of a relationship. Because once you're no longer emotionally reactive, you stop being part of the system. There was no single moment that ended everything. It was accumulation reaching completion. Small inconsistencies finally forming a complete picture. Not dramatic, just undeniable. And once something becomes undeniable, you don't need further proof. Before anything was said out loud, I had already closed the emotional loop internally. That's something most people don't notice. Breakups don't start with words. They start with internal conclusion. And once that conclusion formed, the rest became execution, not emotion. When it finally happened, it wasn't explosive. No shouting, no chaos, no dramatic confrontation, just clarity spoken out loud. I ended it simply, because anything more would have been emotional residue, and there was no emotion left to express. From her perspective, it felt sudden. From mine, it had been gradual for a long time. And that mismatch is why breakups feel confusing to one side and obvious to the other. But what came after the breakup wasn't what I expected. People assume ending something brings immediate relief. But what actually comes first is silence. Not external silence, internal. No interpretation, no waiting, no emotional forecasting, just space. And space feels unfamiliar at first, because your mind is used to noise. I didn't move on immediately. I just stopped maintaining something that no longer existed emotionally. And slowly, everything else started returning. Focus, structure, clarity. Not because I gained something new, but because I stopped carrying something unnecessary. And only later did I understand what actually happened. It wasn't betrayal that ended things. It wasn't confrontation. It wasn't even distance alone. It was misalignment that was never corrected. And misalignment doesn't explode. It just continues until one side stops participating. From far enough away, nothing looks dramatic anymore. Just clear. And clarity removes emotional distortion. My name is Jason Cole, and I used to think relationships ended because something broke. Now I understand something different. They end when one person stops trying to interpret what the other person no longer maintains. And the hardest part isn't leaving. It's realizing you already left long before you ever said it out loud. And the strange part is, nothing fell apart in a moment. It just quietly stopped being the same story.